Well, hi everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee on this Monday. Welcome to my YouTube channel. It's 3 minutes after 7 o'clock Eastern Time on December the 10th, 2018. Now think about this, folks. We had back in mid-November for areas from, say, just Washington, D.C. or at points north and northeastward, saw in a lot of places the largest snowfall so early in the season. For some areas there, and also if you remember back through parts of the upper Midwest from another system that followed, many areas seeing all-time monthly snowfall records go for the month of November, along with individual storm totals and daily totals and monthly totals. And now you have this weather system in the south. So it was the area south of Washington, D.C., but particularly, you didn't have to go that far south of Washington, D.C. It was a pretty sharp cutoff between no snow and accumulating snow, and that line got to about just north of Charlottesville. And in fact, the northern edge of snow made it even into southernmost Delaware. But just south of there, down through much of the interior areas of Virginia, North Carolina, and even not that far in the interior areas, by the way, North Carolina, northwestern South Carolina, areas seeing the earliest that they've ever seen a snowfall of this magnitude, all sorts of records being broken left and right. Records at Richmond, 11 inches, I believe it was the second biggest ever, and certainly the biggest for this time of year. And you have to go back to, I think it was 1908 when they got 15 inches from a storm. It's just, we've seen 3 of these now. You just wonder where this is all going to go down the road. I would also, I know a number of you, both here and also elsewhere, because they're on my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Chaffee, are on the the warm weather pattern route that's ahead of us. And I have stated that for you snow weenies out there, you need to take a reasonable approach to the weather pattern or weather patterns, because we really have been in this current weather pattern since mid-October. That's almost 8 weeks. That's pretty long for a pattern to hold on. So it's not unusual that we're seeing the pattern relax to some degree. I don't necessarily even regard this as a wholesale pattern change, by the way. It seems to me, looking at what I see in the long range, is that we're getting a short-term relaxation that's going to last about a week or two. And I'm kind of having my doubts in terms of the magnitude of this relaxation, depending on how things play out in the longer term and which model has the upper hand in all of this. But I still think that regardless, late this month we're going to see a new pattern evolve, or maybe it'll be the same one we just came out of. Perhaps it'll be similar to. There will be some differences. We'll see. I think. To get worried about whatever long range 200-day map shows, or the month of March anomalies, this, that, or the other thing, is just not a smart way to approach weather. You'll be burned more often than not, and why even concern yourself about stuff that is so far out in long range you can't really get a handle on it anyhow. So everybody take a breather, okay, as far as you snow weenies out there are concerned. Now, for those of you who are in the Mid-Atlantic, interior Mid-Atlantic, interior parts of North Carolina, South Carolina, basically the areas that have gotten the big snows out of this system, bear in mind that we probably have a soaking rain event to deal with Friday night into the weekend. Or for you, an area might be even sooner than that. It might be probably later Friday afternoon, Friday night, and on Saturday. This could be a multiple inch rain producer on the order of 2 or 3 inches. Not written in stone yet, but certainly the cards are on the table for such an event. And if you put that on top of what you have on the ground now in some areas, which is really you've had the equivalent, a lot of areas in North Carolina, rain or snow wound up, or some combination thereof, wound up with the equivalent of about a couple of inches of liquid, maybe even a little bit more. So if you've got all this snow on the ground that's going to be melted and washed away by this 2 to 3 inch rain event, flooding is probably going to occur. So just bear that in mind, and we'll talk more about that when we show the models in just a couple of minutes. Okay, big welcomes to SS Storm Chaser forecast team audience from South Central Pennsylvania and North Central Maryland. Welcome tonight to the my YouTube live stream. To Angry Ben's Angry Weather folks, welcome to New York, New Jersey, Connecticut Stormwatch page. Welcome aboard, and also to folks from my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. So thanks for everybody being on here. If you're new, hit the subscribe button on my YouTube channel. It's free, and you get notified of live streams, which I do at least once a day. And let's see. Just trying to see a number of you that are on the chat. Okay, I'm going to give everybody a collective hello, and let's get right to what's going on tonight around the area. First off, we're still not quite done with what's been happening down in the Carolinas because we do have this second low that's developing. So we do have residual winter weather advisories up for much of inland North Carolina, mostly along and north and west of I-95, and goes all the way back to the state line of Tennessee. And it even extends into a couple of counties in northwest South Carolina and extreme northeastern Georgia, because we do have some moisture rotating around on the radar from this second low that's developing just offshore, and we'll show you that in a second. Meanwhile, up in the northwest, we're starting to see winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories going up. And as the pattern relaxes and the trough is going to now shift, at least temporarily, out to the west or more to the west, we're going to see the northwestern part of the U.S. pick up the slack with snowfall here going forward, and you will have a number of opportunities for snow up in your area. So just bear that in mind, okay? So that takes care of the watches and warnings tonight. There really isn't too much else going on. The weather across much of the eastern part of the U.S. is pretty darn quiet. Now, I'm going to bring up WPC, the Weather Prediction Center's forecast map for rainfall for the next precipitation for the next 7 days, because again, I think the threat for some heavy rains going on late this week and into this weekend in the interior mid-Atlantic is a very important thing to keep an eye on because of all the snow cover that's on the ground that's going to get melted out and washed away. But you can look on the scale. There's nothing of consequence that's going to happen between now and then. So this is all from later Friday and Saturday. You're talking about 2 to 3 inch areas, and even some areas a bit higher from northeast Georgia right up into northwestern Virginia. That really kind of lines up pretty well with the areas that got a foot plus, believe it or not. It's probably a little bit too far north in Virginia, but it's pretty close. And then you've got more heavy rains in central and eastern North Carolina down to coastal South Carolina, and a snaking area of an inch to 2 inches running up through parts of Pennsylvania and in through upstate New York and in New England. And this is going to be all rain, by the way, pretty much all the way up, because the cold air is going to pull out after Thursday. There probably won't even be any cold air to deal with at the start of precipitation. The U.S. satellite tonight, visible here, we should probably be able to at least, well, there's a lot of cloud cover throughout much of the southeast, but this is that lingering system. Meanwhile, dry air moved down through much of southeastern Canada, moved down the Hudson Valley, and made for a beautiful day in my neck of the woods, eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, and that pushed its way a little bit further south. The high clouds were kind of borderline there for a little while, at least into, looks like, actually down to the southern Delmarva, so it really cleared out nicely all the way down into northern Virginia. But certainly a nice day, albeit a cold day, and our air is going to be coming down from southeastern Canada through Thursday. So no issues there, but you still, again, have that residual moisture that's still left laying around. The radar tonight does show, by the way, on these two separate areas of rain. I'm going to bring up the regional radar here. And there is snow if you on the northern and western fringe of that you see just inland of the coast in North Carolina going northwestward. Now, some of this is aloft, but the radar is picking up some snow in those areas. That's why the advisories are still up, and you've got this other area that's kind of pivoting southeastward into northern South Carolina, northern Georgia. Most of this is rain from what I can see. The temperatures, at least at the time, for the time being, in a lot of areas are hovering just above the freezing mark, so that's a good thing. There's some colder air to the north that'll probably drain southward once skies clear out, so anything standing when we go below freezing will probably just ice over, so bear that in mind. But nothing heavy. I mean, this is nothing like what was on the radar Saturday night, nothing that was on the radar during the day yesterday. Now, in terms of snowfall totals, just to show you, again, these were unprecedented amounts for this time of year. You don't get this that often. In fact, I can't recall a storm of this magnitude this early in the interior southern parts of the mid-Atlantic states and in the inland areas also. I mean, you've got those red blotches of 18 to 24 that occurred in parts of northwestern North Carolina. There were some snow amounts on the order of 20 to 30 inches in some of the mountain areas there. Also, notice Charlotte, North Carolina got very lucky. There was, anytime there's a snowstorm of any kind, you're never going to get a absolute perfect snowstorm, a snowfall forecast. It just doesn't happen. Okay. If you go back and look at all the models, and if you look at all the different snow maps and snow predictions, I guarantee you would be hard-pressed to find one that hit the whole area or even half the area correct in terms of the numbers. But it did at least get the general idea of how the contours might shape up in terms of the heavier snow. And that's probably the more useful way of using those modeled snowfall forecast maps. But the northern edge, a couple of takeaways that I think we should pay attention to going down the road because it may prove useful. The northern edge did not move significantly northward, but it did move somewhat northward, and some models handled it better than others. I think that the parallel GFS probably did the best job with that. We wound up with snow at least falling out of the sky, making it almost to DC, and it did actually make it into southernmost Delaware. So that was something that the models most of the models were too suppressed with, particularly the European, I thought was too suppressed overall with all of this. So the parallel GFS, I think, did a pretty good job. Also, you got some heavy snows that were a little further on the northwest flank in southern West Virginia and in southeastern Kentucky. You did have those max amounts of 18 to 24 that was modeled by a number of different models, had that volume. Again, Charlotte kind of wound up being denied to some degree because there was a little bit of a warm intrusion. When you start to deal with the subtleties that cause systems to wind up being further north, you're going to, the southern flank may wind up being a little bit further north, and that's sort of what happened. But just north and west of Charlotte, the snowfall amounts increased fairly rapidly. Raleigh, I'll show you on the close-up map that I have here, that starting with the area in and around Raleigh, south and east of Raleigh, the amounts start to go down. They were kind of in the 3 to 5 inch range, but just to the north and northwest of Raleigh, you started to get into some pretty hefty amounts of 7, 8, 11 inches. I don't have I don't have a lot of city identifiers here, but you head up toward Durham, North Carolina, near 85. I'm guessing that's 85 and says 85 and 15, but 85. You're looking at 4 inches in Durham, but surrounding areas up to and over a foot in some areas as you head toward the Durham line, and then you go a little bit further up into North Carolina toward Burlington. You've got some 8 and 11 inch amounts recorded there. Off further northwest towards Greensboro, you're looking at most areas in near Greensboro getting at least 10 inches. So it was basically a 10 to 12 inch snowfall there, High Point, Oak Ridge, and so on. And then on up to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and you're looking at 10, 12, even 14 and a half inches being recorded. I wish that they had this where you could actually, pick out the exact spot in terms of the numbers. And then there's kind of a gap here going west. There aren't too many numbers. You got to wait for actually, here we go. I got in wide enough so that you can actually see it. So here's Greensboro, and then we go west of Greensboro, and the numbers are not populating here very well. So there were some before, but for some reason they're not there. And then, of course, you head south and east, and you're looking at, amounts certainly tailing off considerably once you get further south and east and closer to the coastline, where there was just, virtually nothing. Goldsboro, 3/10 of an inch of snow. That looks like the southern and easternmost observation that we have of the snow. Now here's the latest surface. Actually, it's not the latest one. I'm going to bring the latest one up now if it loads. But there's your, the low. This is the second low that's beginning to develop here, and that is, we're waiting for the energy that's spinning around from that. Here's the 21Z 4 o'clock surface map. You've got this second low center that is being analyzed, and it looks like there's some missing data here, but you get the idea. You're getting this double low structure that is creating the second round of snow. Looks like even a little bit of a Norland trough maybe being analyzed, coming in from off the Carolina coast and moving toward the southwest. So again, you're going to see this continue for a little while tonight, and gradually all of this is going to be moving away to the east. And temperatures, we have just a couple of places right now that are sitting at near 32 or 33 in North Carolina, but you're likely to see more of these numbers coming down. And of course, you go further north, and now you start to get to where there's clear skies, and you've got temperatures. They're radiating they're going to radiate quite a bit tonight in the areas just inland, just north of the Virginia-North Carolina border, where temperatures are already down into the low 20s in some places. And in my neck of the woods, we're looking at temperatures that are also beginning to drop pretty quickly. We've got a north wind coming down the Hudson Valley, cold air from southeastern Canada, upstate New York, and New England. So we're seeing our temperatures drop into the 20s. It's already down to 19 at West Hampton, which is only about 20 miles from my house. So it's very, very cold out there indeed on Long Island. The Long Island Pine Barrens, it gets like an ice box. The same happens in the Pine Barrens in the southern half of New Jersey. You get some really crazy off-the-wall readings as far as temperatures are concerned, particularly when it comes to snow cover. So let's take a look at what's going to happen down the road and why I don't necessarily, you got to be careful when I know a number of you forecast shop. Everybody forecast shops. I can't stop you from forecast shopping, okay? So, you go to the Weather Channel, you go to this place or that place. This one says this, that one says that, yada, 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 all right? I honestly, I got to tell you, when you tell me what they say, it really doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't change my mind about things. I've already made up my mind about what I think is going to happen. So it doesn't really impact how I think. And, I certainly could spend my time saying I agree with them, I disagree with them, but I have really no interest in doing that. They do what they do, they say what they say. That's their business, and I do what I do, and I say what I say, and that's my business, and it's the business of those of you who are watching. So, say goodbye to that low. Now, there's a cold front that's coming down from this. You got these lows that are developing offshore. So there's actually another cold front that's dropping down Wednesday from southeastern Canada. That's bringing another shot of cold air into the northeast. It doesn't make it all the way down. It just makes it pretty much down into the northeast of the northern mid-Atlantic. So it's going to keep that area cold through Thursday. And in the meantime, with those winter storm warnings that are up for the northwest, you've got this next energy that's coming in to the northwest and into the northern Rockies. That's going to drop into the Southen Plains. And you've got another fairly wrapped up low that's going to develop there and start its way out toward the northeast. Now, this next high is going to move out offshore and wind up south and east of Cape Cod at some point. And the next low is going to come out of the south, but this one is going to ride up the Appalachians. I think, I know the Europeans got, tries to have a low that winds up offshore. I'm not 100% sure that that's going to happen. I think there's, you've got enough troughing and enough ridging on either side that you're still going to wind up with some kind of primary that's going to go up toward western PA. And by the way, there's no cold air. None, all right, at all. So all of this precip is going to be rain. And for the areas in the southern mid-Atlantic, interior southeast, where you've got all this deep snow cover starting during the early morning hours on Friday and during the day Friday and Friday night, you get into some pretty heavy rains here. And there still might even be some lingering showers into Saturday. So I had I misspoke earlier in terms of the timing. For my neck of the woods, eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, the rain is going to be coming in during the early morning hours of Saturday, and we're going to have rain and wind. I think there's going to be a pretty strong and gusty south-southeast wind. You're going to have a primary low that's going to wind up trying to go either in northwest PA or western Ohio. Doesn't really make too much of a difference. There'll be an occluded front, and there'll likely be a low that develops perhaps in inland North Carolina or inland southern New Virginia at the point of occlusion. So there might be some rain and wind in my area into Saturday evening until this all pulls up into New England. Now, here's where you start to get a little bit dicey with regards to what happens afterwards, because the GFS is trying to bring down energy into southeastern Canada that winds up strengthening a bit. So you actually have a shot of cold air that comes into the northeast and northern mid-Atlantic for the first part of next week. It's not a long-lasting shot because the system is going to move along. And then you've got another system that is going to be coming out from coming in from the Pacific Northwest. Okay, that's going to drop into the Southern Plains. This one is a little bit interesting to me, and I think it ties in with what I'm seeing with the teleconnections from today that would point to something happening along the East Coast around the 20th, on the 20th to the 22nd, somewhere in that time frame. And at least the model run today does show some kind of developing low moving up the coast, and actually shows some colder air coming back into the Great Lakes and into parts of the Northeast, although it doesn't make it, to the coastline. But you wind up, if this is correct, with some kind of deep low in the Gulf of Maine. I don't think it's going to match up exactly to this, but at least from the standpoint of what the teleconnections showed today, I'll pull those up in a second. It kind of makes sense that around that time frame, there could be some sort of system impacting the eastern part of the U.S. And then it's actually pretty cold going into the weekend before Christmas, before we get another system coming in. And then Christmas Eve, if you want to believe this, I mean, at this point, who knows? But it does have an overall colder look developing gradually once we get past the middle part of next week. Will it work out this way exactly? I don't know. Might it take longer? Quite possibly it could. But the fact that the models are kind of trending in this direction, is notable to me, and we're going to want to sit around and look to see if we get any consistency over the next week or so. Now, I've just kind of showed you how where it goes to, but in fact, before we even do that, let me bring up the teleconnections from today, and I think this at least will try to explain why I don't believe that we're going to get, it's certainly not going to get blowtorch warm. I haven't seen anybody really say that with regards to the pattern going forward, but there are a couple of mitigating things here that offset a bit, and you've got, except for later this week, where the P&A actually goes briefly negative, and that's because of the weather systems that are coming into the west and a ridge that's trying to build into the east. You do have the P&A actually going back to somewhat positive. It's not strongly positive. When it's up at around 200 or higher, I would say that's strongly positive. It's somewhat positive. If it's less than 100, it's kind of weakly positive. But somewhat positive is interesting. But note the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, where you have the NAO actually going somewhat negative. It's sitting neutral right now, being impacted by the lows off the Carolina coast. But with a deepening low out in the ocean to the east over the next several days, and you are seeing that NAO coming down to minus 100, which is, it's somewhat negative. It's not crazy negative. And then it rushes back up toward the neutral line by the time we get to the 21st, 22nd. That coincides, by the way, with the East Pacific Oscillation, which makes a pretty radical move here. It goes from being off the wall positive at plus 300 in about 2 days. So you can understand how the cold air, when the EPO is strongly positive, when that East Pacific Oscillation is strongly positive, that means that you've got a lot of troughing going on up in the Gulf of Alaska and on points northward, okay? And that pretty much cuts off the cold air. There's no, the cold cuts the east off from the cold air. But notice that it goes, it starts to trend lower, although still strongly positive, till around the middle of the month. And then it really just collapses down to neutral very rapidly around the same time frame that you've got the NAO going neutral, which is around the 20th to the 22nd. So if you looked at what we showed on today's GFS, that is a time frame for some kind of weather system in the east. Specifically, I couldn't begin to tell you what it means, but at least we have an idea of a time frame. And after that, it starts to trend negative. So let's see where this goes in the coming days. If the models hold on to this idea, do they back off from it? Or do they actually maybe accelerate the EPO going negative? It's my opinion of all these indices, if you're a winter weather lover and a snow lover in the east, you want that EPO to be negative, okay? I think that's I think that's I've said this many times. It's far more important to have the EPO negative than it is to have the NAO negative. The NAO to me is a vastly overrated and overstated concept from the standpoint of its impact. And by the way, that storm in the mid-Atlantic and into the southeast is a direct result of too much NAO, okay? And you can have such a thing. If we'd had a little less NAO, you probably would have had that system come much further to the north. So be careful what you root for if you're a snow lover or a weather weenie, because you may get it and you may not like what happens. Okay, so let's back to the upper air pattern. Now, the trough in the east, and this is from the weekend, of course, and now that's pulling out, moving away. You see how suppressed it was going out underneath us. And there's one other system, by the way, this upper low, there's a little weak trough that's going to come in on Thursday that some models actually are showing a small area of snow that forms over parts of New Jersey on Thursday, southern New Jersey in particular. I'm going to wait on that to see if that has any real value. It may just wind up being a weak system that produces clouds and not much else. A few models have picked up on it, so we're going to keep our eye on it to see what happens. But you can see for the end of the week, the next trough, again, the southern part of the jet, very important, but take a look at the north, okay? And I think we'll probably do a good, this will be a good opportunity to put it in the paint box and show you the specifics. So let's bring up the Les Box de Paint. Okay. Remember that the flow is counterclockwise around lows, clockwise around highs. So if you just remember that part of it, you'll get where I'm going with all of this. But if you follow where the upper winds are going to be coming from when we get to the end of this week, they're not coming from a place that would bring down cold air. Okay, this is Pacific air that's coming in, that gets deflected up into southern Canada, that moves along and then goes out. Okay, you have a southern part of this jet stream here. Okay, so there's no real cold air. All the real cold air is going to be back up in this area. All right, and there's no way for it to come down if the flow is west-southwest across much of Canada, okay? Much of southern Canada, at least. You need the flow to be something coming from up here that brings the cold air down into the eastern part of the United States. You're not going to do it when you've got all this mess that's out here out in the west. I mean, that's just a huge, gigantic, amorphous, troughing mess that's out there. So that what's going on off the Pacific coast, that is your positive East Pacific oscillation, by the way. That what's going on in that entire area there is your EPO going off the wall positive because of the huge extent of this troughing that exists from Alaska, south of the Aleutians, into the Gulf of Alaska, to the Pacific Northwest coast. All of that area going up into Northwest Canada it's just no good. Okay, so we got to clean that mess up. And here's our weather system that plays out for the end of the week. That lifts up. But you've got this, now you start to see some changes. This is where your Pacific North America index starts to pop up more positive, and your EPO now is beginning to weaken because the trough axis, the trough, that messy trough that's out off the west coast is also, it's actually becoming more organized. You're getting a deeper low into the Gulf of Alaska. So it's getting a bit more cleaned up over time. And gradually, when we get out to day 10, which is not overly far out in the long range, you've got a different look here. So, let's go out 10 days to about the 20th of December. And now you've got a whole different ball game when it comes to this. So here's your look on the 20th on the paint box, and we'll show you how the jet looks now, and it looks decidedly different from what it looks at the what it's going to be, what it looks like for later this week. So let me get this drawn on here. So now your flow, now you've got your air coming down from Canada. It's not a strong flow, but it is a colder flow that's starting to come in, and you're getting a bit of a upper low in this area just north of Lake Huron. So you're getting a colder connection from Canada. You have a much better looking profile here. Your EPO is continuing to become less and less positive. Your ridge in the west is beginning to pop up. So your PNA, your Pacific North America index, which measures ridge in the west, trough in the east, is also beginning to strengthen. So here we are just into the 20th. This does not look to me like a big warm-up, all right, if the GFS is correct. And look, this is a couple of runs that's done this. It's probably going to evolve some more in subsequent runs, but I just don't see this getting to be a big blowtorch. Then that pulls out, and if you really want to use your imagination, this is the point where you start to get into a negative EPO, a much colder looking upper air if it looks like this, and this is the day after Christmas. So obviously we're past day 10, as I've said many times. You have to view these things as highly suspect. Not all the models are on the same page. Today's European, at least on day 10, is wants to kind of have the same look that we've just gone through, that we're just going to be going through this weekend. Another ridge on the west coast, ridge on the east coast, trough in the middle, and this would argue for another rainstorm coming up toward the 21st, 22nd. But also, at least on the European, you are seeing the improvement in the pressure pattern for snow lovers anyway, or cold weather lovers, improvement in what's going on in the Gulf of Alaska and in areas up in the northeastern part of the Pacific Ocean. So the European might get to the same place, but do it a bit differently. It does have the same idea with the southern system, but it keeps it a little flatter and kicks it out south off the Virginia coast. In no way is any of this going to be anything other than what it is. And that's rain, by the way, for the end of the week and the weekend. Then you have the system dropping down into the northeast, which the GFS is much more developed with than the European is. The European kind of develops it when it gets into eastern New England, so that'll be a quick cold shot and out, and then it goes to this. So here's your GFS. Much colder look on the GFS late this afternoon. And the Canadian, for what it's worth, has a whole ridge blown up all the way up into the east and troughing all over the place in the west. It's in a completely different world. I honestly, the Canadian to me has gotten so squirrely at times that I really don't see that it has a lot of value at the moment in the longer range. It might be worth looking at in the shorter range, but even there, it's just been doing some really, crazy off-the-wall things lately, and I just don't know that it's very good as a forecast tool. Why don't we take a look at the parallel GFS, because that actually hasn't done half badly, and we have the new one. So, here's your system for the weekend. Kind of looks a little bit more like the European with the upper low going underneath New York City and Long Island, and then that goes out. It's got another upper low that forms southeast of Long Island next Monday. We'll see what it does at the surface. That's interesting enough. It looks like the parallel is not really that far off from the operational. It just gets there, but again, it gets kind of to the same place, just maybe takes a little bit longer. And it does have a somewhat colder look overall when we get out into the long range. So at least the parallel gives you an idea that the operational GFS may not be completely out to lunch with its view. Let's take a look at what it does with these storm systems. And we shall let it load. Maps, by the way, courtesy of Levi Cowan's TropicalTidbits.com. And we thank him oh so much for allowing us the privilege of using them. Thank you very much. So here's your Saturday storm, another big wet event, primary low to the west. We talked about that. That goes out. Then you got that second thing that drops behind it, makes for a low well offshore. And then here's your next southern system. Hardly find it. Cold front on the 20th. So it really doesn't do anything with the 20th to 22nd time frame. And it's on the mild side until we bring a low up the coast right going into Christmas Eve with colder air trying to wedge back in at the very last second. So even the parallel GFS gives White Christmas folks a very narrow hope in a very narrow band, if you want to believe it. So far out in the long range, so who knows what we're going to see in subsequent runs. But it does have a colder look to it, and I think that's the takeaway that you should have. I do not buy, as I've said already, I'm not buying the wholesale warm up. We're due for a break. We're due for a pattern relaxation. I think that's what it's going to be, and that's it. And then toward get into the last 10 days of the month, we'll see where the models take us. But I still think that the fact that what we've seen so far with basically three unprecedented events in three different areas, two of them in the East, the other one in the Midwest, in the last 25 days, it just kind of makes you wonder where the winter is going to be going. I don't know if those things happened in a vacuum, and then we wind up with 3 months of, relatively next to nothing, which I kind of doubt. I think we're going to have our I think we're going to have our snow chances along the way, so you snow lovers won't be disappointed. Where it goes ultimately, I have no clue. No one does. All right, so stop forecast shopping. Okay. All right, just listen to me. Don't forecast shop. All right. I'm going to turn the light on here. Hang on a second. By the way, good idea. Those of you in the Mid-Atlantic states, try to make sure the snow that's on the ground. Try to clear your drain areas on your streets because you don't want to put a couple of inches of rain on top of this. It's going to stay relatively chilly into Thursday, and then you're going to go right into rain. So it's all going to wind up melting everything's going to be coming together at the same time. So just bear that in mind. All is well, New York Jets fan weather. I appreciate that. Green Fire 919, following my advice. I totally agree. Kathy Albano, we have a warm air vortex that just everything to rain. I don't know where you were, Kathy. I'm assuming you are. You were down in the part of down in the Mid-Atlantic that didn't get the snow. Rick 8013, would I comment on the models and how they seem to overdo snow coverage? Most of the ones we looked at here did good on total snowfall in the core of the plot, but too much spread. Because the model snow maps really should not be used for total amounts. They just shouldn't. You have to understand that a lot of those 10 to 1 maps don't take into account sleet. They don't take into account freezing rain. They don't take into account a mix. They don't even take into account melting, okay? So that might occur. There's a lot of areas where it snowed for a while where the temperatures were 33, 34. So some of it accumulated, but not all of it did. So you can't use those snow maps as forecast tools. You can look at them and say, you can look at them in the context, and Cranky Weather Guy on Twitter pointed this out, and I agree with him on this. Some of the snowfall maps that the models were generated sort of got the contours right in terms of how the snow area was going to line up. But in terms of the numbers it spit out, you just can't pay any attention to that sort of thing. Other than to say that, for example, in the longer range when the European was spitting out these 18 to 24 inch plus amounts, you certainly could use that and say, well, this is a good area where we're going to get at least a foot. That would have worked. But you can't use it as a forecast tool. Scott Briller, just remember there's two definitions of a white Christmas. If you're using the definition of it actually snowing on Christmas Day, I don't believe that that's really what the definition should be. I think it should also include snow on the ground, because there are a number of years where there's been significant snow on the ground during Christmas because of storms that have occurred before Christmas. Once in, maybe at least twice during, that I can recall, in the last 15 years where that was the case. So, white Christmas to me is it's got to be the snow, at least an inch of snow on the ground or snowing on the actual day, and I'm okay with that. All right, I'm just running back, trying to make sure, see if there were any questions. By the way, I did say this before on the pre-show chat, which there actually is a pre-show chat, by the way. Once the schedule goes up, the chat board is open. So if you jump on early, you can get into conversations. I'm there on there, but I kind of come and go, but depending on what I'm doing. So feel free, by the way. to jump on early. If I'm around, I'll certainly try to answer your question. You get a little private time, I guess. Let's see. Christmas is so far ahead, Kathy Albano. There's plenty of time for models to do adjusting in any direction. So just bear that in mind. Oh, and let me just, William Huber, you just reminded me, yeah, you're going to radiate like crazy tonight because it's already down in the teens, as I said, over in West Hampton. I was scheduled to do a library talk at the Babylon Library on Wednesday, but the library has canceled it. So we'll see if we can try to reschedule it at some point down the road. This happens from time to time, so no big deal. I'm happy about it. I get the day off, so it works. All right. Daniel Carter, your trifling neighbor, couldn't get the driveway and ditches his car in the street at the end of the drive. Well, I'm guessing, you guys don't get as much snow or get snow often enough where you can, kind of figure out how to get the car in the driveway. Maybe he needs a couple of neighbors to go out and help him push the car into the driveway. Or either that or you should get a four-wheel drive vehicle, and then you wouldn't have this problem. Let's see. Stangman 04, not looking forward to this weekend with the rain. Next weekend we have rain for multiple days as well. Let's say first things first with this coming weekend and deal with whatever we deal with. But that rain is going to be a potential flooding problem for the areas that just got the heavy snow. Chris Galton, already 10 inches over on the rainfall. A lot of places in the east seeing their top 3 rainfall years on their records, and there's time for those records to be broken between now and the end of the year. Marquise Vincent, it's like Baltimore and Washington, D.C. need a perfect setup for anything, but if the low pressure is too close, then you wind up with sleet or rain. There's always, oddly enough, for most places that is the case, believe it or not. You don't, even in places where it does snow much more than it does, where you happen to be or where I happen to be, even for those places, they fight the same things. Lows too far north, too far south. They, for any specific area, you got to get the track to be just right, and that's a tough thing to do. The areas that wind up getting 1 foot plus snows in storms geographically are usually fairly small. The big storms that produce widespread, 1 foot plus snows, those are fairly rare. They don't happen every year. They don't even happen every other year or every 5th year. They might be once in 10-year events like the blizzard in 16, the January 16th storm, going back to the Boxing Day storm, and a few others along the way. Those are not, those are unusual. It's the ones where you get, these sort of narrow bands, these narrow areas of geography that wind up with a foot plus. Those are a bit more typical. The AO, David, I'm not sure of the actual specific value of the AO. I'm guessing that the AO right now is not in a favorable position. I'd have to go look for it, and I can't do it now. But if the longer range is correct, in particular with what's going to be going on in the high levels of the atmosphere toward the end of the month, it's probably going to want to go negative. But I'm going to have to give it a closer look a little bit later. I don't always get to everything, folks, believe it or not. There's just not enough time in the day to look at every single thing and every single indicator. I kind of gravitate to what I'm comfortable with. And then if somebody suggests to me, oh, did you see the AO? Did you see the NAO? Did you see this, that, or the other thing? The NAO I'll look at. I'll look at those 4 indices most of the time. But beyond that, I really don't. Would the ridge in the west eventually move east? Okay, it depends on which ridge. If you're talking about the ridge that when the pattern is somewhat progressive, the thing that probably keeps the ridge in the east from getting too strong is the fact that you do have a neutral to negative NAO, and that helps kind of keep it flatter. So it probably won't migrate to the east unless you have a completely progressive pattern where everything just kind of rolls along. But we don't quite have that because the NAO is somewhat negative. Who's in Alaska? What happened to Long Island that day? Okay. I'm sorry, I've just kind of lost the thread here. If you're, Joseph Ferrand, if you're referring to the Boxing Day blizzard, we got a foot plus on Long Island, but the greatest amounts on that one was in that happened in New Jersey. Yeah, David, you're not alone. I try to read Dr. Judah Cohen's blog. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there. Some of it I understand, but admittedly, there's a lot of it that's a little bit over my head, and a lot of it that's a lot over my head. I can eventually kind of piece it together, but it's work. Okay, but there are at least some areas where I think if you read it carefully, you can kind of figure out, where he's going with all of this. And I think he's going with the idea that we may see the colder pattern come back and an Arctic connection once we get past Christmas, if that significant warming event occurs up in the stratosphere, way up in the upper atmosphere, the way he's figuring on it happening. All right. That pretty much wraps it up, folks. We've gone a long ways tonight. And thanks again for being here. Let me, at this point, just really quick do my usual round of shameless self-promotion because, I got to eat like everybody else. But in all seriousness, if you're really into weather, you might consider joining my subscription platform on Patreon. It's just $2 a month. You get a lot of extra posts. You get live streams just for Patreon members. You get to, you can message me anytime. I'll get back to you in a timely fashion. It's at $2 a month. The link is up there on the chat. If you're in the northern New Jersey, Long Island, New York City, lower Hudson Valley, and southern Connecticut, my app might work for you, and it's on Google Play. Still waiting for iPhone, the iPhone version. Hopefully that will come sooner rather than later. But this app is free, so you can download that if you've got an Android device. By all means, go ahead and download it and enjoy. One other way you could support my channel is if you shop on Amazon. Do it through the Joe Stradamus link that I'm putting up here. Doesn't cost you a dime, and Amazon puts a few cigars in my stocking by sending you over to them to do your shopping. We're a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for this channel to earn fees by linking to Amazon.com and its affiliated sites. So thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Really appreciate it greatly. Welcome to those of you who were new. If you're new, hit the subscribe button. You get these live streams every night. Sometimes in big storms, we go more than once a day. And we love having you here. So thanks very much. And do jump on the chat board. We love seeing new people on the chat. And we will see you tonight at 9:20. Going to attempt a Skype with Joe Rayo for the Joe and Joe Weather Show. And then tomorrow we're back on normal schedule. Probably do a Patreon live stream in the morning for Patreon members. And we'll do our regular YouTube live stream tomorrow night at a couple of minutes after 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Good night, everybody. We'll see you either later or tomorrow.